Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our monthly mentor speaker series. I am so excited to introduce you all, if you do not know of him, to Giacomo Vivanti, who is an associate professor and the program leader in the Early Detection and Intervention program at the AJ Drexel Autism Institute over in Philadelphia. Welcome, Giacomo.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. You have quite the lead-in for your introduction there. I thought we could spend some time talking about what do you do on a daily basis over in the Institute?
Yeah, well, we are trying to figure out how we can improve outcomes. And by outcomes, I'm talking about well-being of children on the autism spectrum using early intervention. So to do that, we need a combination of action, delivery, of early intervention, reaching as many children as possible, which is what we're doing, and research. Examining the outcomes, looking at the data, designing research that allow us to determine what works for whom and
Mm.
why, how to best implement programs so that people can have the maximum benefit. So we are working with um, quite a few projects, NIH funded, industry sponsored, wherever we have resources that we can use to help young children on the autism spectrum and their families.
Yeah, and that's so exciting. And sidebar, I know you just had an article come out not too long ago about autism information on TikTok, which I thought was really interesting. And I think you were on Matt's podcast talking about that. I don't know if you want to chat about that, but I feel like when I see Giacomo, he's everywhere with some really great stuff coming out. And that one was one I wasn't expecting to see you on for the TikTok one.
Well, it's all connected. So the reason why we looked at that is because one of the factors that will affect outcomes for children on the autism spectrum is the degree to which therapists, educators, teachers, and families perceive interventions as being acceptable, as being appropriate, as being the right fit for their children. And one of the things that determine whether the intervention that I suggest is going to be considered to be a good fit for children is whether um, parents, caregivers, teachers, therapists have heard about that intervention on TikTok, for example. So everything that we do um, that is informed by evidence or by science is not automatically perceived to be scientifically acceptable or accurate
Yeah.
if you go on social media. And so I was aware that there was a conversation about autism on social media. I am not a TikTok user, but my
Yeah.
students are. So
So
I
vicariously through them, you get to experience.
Exactly. I used their knowledge to figure out what was going on TikTok, and a lot of information on TikTok are clearly misleading about what causes autism and about how to approach it, which is a consequence of your beliefs
Mhm.
related to what causes it.
Yes, no, for sure. And I think I see things online, not specific to TikTok, with the neurodiversity movement. And, I think that that is really alarming in some aspects with some people who are saying certain things that are very black and white and just big disclaimers. You shouldn't do anything, let them be who they are, and I think that is a lot to unpack for any conversation. But I sit there and I think about its dissemination and its information and what is socially valid or socially significant to a family caregiver culture. It depends on how they, like you said, are perceiving and accessing that information. And
Absolutely.
yeah, like the stuff that comes back, like, oh gosh, I've been doing this for 28 years and I feel like this stuff cycles, like facilitated communication that's cycling back up again. Like that kind of went down away for a while. These fads and treatments that come in that are offering a quick cure and a promise for a better day, right? That quick. Everybody wants that, right? You want to lose weight, go jump on Ozempic, right? You want to do it quick and fast, but it doesn't work and it's not necessarily as informed as it could be. And I think the same thing with our autism treatment. There are certain types of treatments and programs that are going to give you those optimal outcomes that you're talking about. And what that is, you are working hard to figure out what aspect of an intervention makes it so effective for one child, but not another child. And I don't know if you guys have answers to that yet, or
Well, first of all, the one way I believe we can do interventions that are truly neurodiversity affirming is the idea that an intervention should be designed to give each autistic child a voice, a
Mhm,
way to communicate, a way to express themselves, which is going to be different for different children. This is
absolutely.
different from saying this is what you should do based on my opinion. This is about what do I need for this child? What needs to be true for this child
Yeah.
to be able to express their own advocacy. Now, for many children, um, this is a combination of understanding their learning style, what
Mm,
is it that helped them learning, and understanding their profile of strength and needs. And is going to be unique for each child. And then we want to understand the context, and this is about family values and educational style. I cannot go to a family and tell them this is how you educate your child. I need to first listen and understand their experts of their child, and they have a way of naturally facilitating engagement and learning. And then once I have the context, I can draw from evidence-based strategies. And
mhm,
for young children, those will be naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention strategies at this point. That's my starting point. And then I look at the data, and if those are successful, like they are in most cases, I will continue. If I see that progress is lower than I anticipated, then I will take action and look at other options.
for sure. And one of the things that I was really sitting down and looking at, I have been for ages, but I don't know if I shared with you, my son Liam has autism. He's autistic, and he was diagnosed when he was about 18 months old. Mommy knew what to look for, right? And so he has lived in a language-based social environment that is just embedded with ESDM and DBI. I don't know how to parent any other way. That's just who I am. And so I really started thinking about that whole developmental component when I saw him not hitting the milestones and not hitting some of the things that I was expecting him to hit, kind of trajectory wise. But I really kind of went back and looked at some of Jerry Dawson's work about social attention differences and social motivation. And there was a really great article by Chevalier and colleagues who talk about social maintaining, social seeking, social, responsivity, that back and forth reciprocity. Excuse me. And I really started to think about that as, this is one of the beautiful things about ESTM is that we really are kind of honing in on that. We're trying to find that spotlight, right? That's attention. We're trying to find the smile. That's that motivation. And all of Liam's program, regardless of what I wanted to call it, was just chipping away at those three pillars of getting him to initiate, respond, and get that back and forth. And I think a lot of NDBIs really hone in on that, which I think is beautiful. I don't know that I see that as much in traditional ABA type programs, that is kind of the core focus of getting into some of the autism. And I always think about goodness of fit for families and cultures and caregivers. If we can kind of support what is the essence of autism and support them, I think that's a great way to meet the child and the family where they are. So, here in the States, we work under the medical model, which is a deficits-based model. But I also think we focus on strengths and skill-based approaches and NDBIs. And I think that's kind of why it aligns so well with neurodiversity. We do recognize it, we do support it, and we do scaffold to work towards that. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if you've seen that article. It's been out a while. I just loved it.
One thing that is really critical to this notion is the idea that this is a two-way street. We're not just trying to change a child. Uh,
Correct.
we are looking at the child right and need for an education, receiving learning opportunities that work for them. And that means that we teach in a way that is going to be different. So
Yeah.
we are providing those learning opportunities, and this is a change in the environment ultimately.
Mm.
This is similar to adjustments that you do when you realize that someone has a different way of learning. This is not
Mhm.
changing the child, but this in turn is going to change the child through an empowerment
Mm.
uh, process, meaning
Mhm.
you are equipping the child with more tools. And then once they have communication skills that allow them to navigate the opportunities that the society has to offer, they will make their own choices on who to
Mhm.
communicate with and when, and how to use their social knowledge
Mhm.
to be part of social interactions or to avoid other social interactions. The social knowledge is not about interacting all the time.
Mhm.
It is
Yeah.
about understanding the complexity and the nuances of social interaction so that you can make your choice then when do
Yeah.
you want to be part of or when you don't want to be part of social
Mhm.
interaction.
And then advocate for that, and I love that, and, we have accepted that Liam's brain is wired differently. That's how it works, he's neurodivergent, and what we try to do when we support him is not trying to change the essence of who he is as a person, we're trying to give him the skills that he needs to live his best life and be independent and advocate for himself. But there's also boundaries as a parent, you are not allowed to do that behavior. Well, it might feel good for you to jump up and down and off the couch. It's not a safety thing that we want to have to address. So I think that's really important as we support caregivers to kind of say, like, we're not trying to change your kid, we're trying to give them the skills. If I want to be healthy, I go to the gym, right? I exercise. If I want to go visit Italy, maybe I'll get on Babbel and take a little course to try to get some skills so I can functionally communicate as I navigate my way around. So I don't feel like those things change the essence of who I am. They're just skill development to help me in different social situations learn to interact with the world around me. And I think that's what we kind of try to do with the children we support. We're trying to give them the skills, fill in the gaps, stretch the strengths, if you will, to help them. And there's just so many interventions out there for parents to really which one is best and which one is best for that family is a really hard question to unpack.
Yeah, this is a new development in the field. I have two brothers who are autistic, and when they were diagnosed back then in Italy in the early 90s, there were no options for intervention. The standard approach to autism was psychotherapy for the mother, based on the belief, obviously, the completely
But,
mistaken belief that mothers were the cause of autism, basically bad parenting.
mhm,
At a new stage where um, there's access not so much to services, there's access to information about services,
mm,
mostly through internet and social media, so people can learn about different things that are under the umbrella of autism intervention services and support. So this is it's a different problem, but it's also a problem
mm,
when there is no filter to such information and when it's unclear how the availability of that scientific knowledge about interventions that are evidence-based, how to turn that into services and actions and things that you can do timely. So it's complex, it's anxiety provoking. We try to give families as much guidance as possible to navigate this complexity, but ultimately it's about giving uh, some kind of parsimony
mm,
to the field. I don't go to a family saying these are your 20 options. This is too much.
yeah,
This is why I like NDBIs because they ultimately created some parsimony
mm,
in the field by
yeah,
basically basically putting together approaches that were more similar than different.
Yeah.
Similarities are very important. Differences are important too, but
Yeah.
similarities do exist. And I think that is alone a huge help for families.
Yeah, and I entered NDBIs from coming from a traditional ABA background, back in the 90s. Card would come out to Iowa where I lived at the time. And it was very drill and kill at the table, mass trial. And then I morphed and went into verbal behavior, PRT, ESDM, NDBIs. I've just really morphed along the way as I found what was meaningful for me and what I found valuable in helping families and now helping my own family. And that goodness of fit with the NDBIs, it just feels right. It just, when we think about the developmental stuff that's missing for most, I think, ABA providers, that they don't get that in their coursework and they don't work at a place where they have access to somebody supporting that being their knowledge of skills and child development, it really influences treatment and programming outcomes. So that was the big thing for me with NDBIs is the D, is really understanding the developmental components. And then when we had Liam, I really went down a rabbit hole. What am I supposed to do with my 4-month-old baby? How should I get the Everly boxes? What should I do to entertain him and engage him? Because I didn't have kids before and I haven't been around a lot of infants. So I really think that NDBIs bring a lot of that to families. And that focus on the development really kind of helps get into education, right? The education models that go into preschool and pre-K and kindergarten. And I'm just wondering about the studies that you have going on now. Are those local to the States, or do you have any research outside of the States that kind of aligns with what you're talking about?
Yeah, we have a variety of research projects, including international projects. I've been involved in implementation efforts in Brazil,
Uh-huh.
in my own country, which is Italy, um, in different areas of Pacific Islands. Um, but the one that perhaps is the one that I'm most excited about is a project called MIRA. And MIRA means Minimal Intervention Responders in Autism. This is a large um, project that is based on a consortium that I created with a wonderful team of co-investigators. And what we did is to generate a new data set,
Mm.
which is an aggregate data set with data for all children who have participated in university-based early intervention programs, which documented outcomes for young children who received intervention for at least 1 year.
Okay.
And the reason why we did that is because we wanted to go beyond the question of is this intervention working compared to not doing this intervention, but really looking at profiles of children who benefit the most and profiles of children who do not
Mm.
show a lot of benefit from our intervention in a very large um, data set. So we have over 1,000 children with very,
Wow.
very well documented data on the interventions that they received and their specific um, demographics and clinical profiles. And so we're learning a lot about, again, going beyond the specific um, sort of brand name for the intervention and looking at things that seem to be very important for these children to be able to respond to those interventions. So this is not published yet, but we're going to present the data at the International Society for Autism Research meeting in Australia in a couple of months.
Yeah.
But to give you an example, for example, it seems like spontaneous imitation is a very important um, sort of factor that is associated with children learning how to talk.
Mm.
So if your children who are minimally verbal, they don't have any
That's
language at the beginning of the intervention, but tends to imitate spontaneously, tend to ultimately learn language and to acquire phrase speech.
Mm.
in 1 year. Um, Again, this is spontaneous imitation, not
Mhm.
imitation in
Uh-huh.
response to instructions like do this, do that. And this, so this is telling us that facilitating that spontaneous inclination to engage in the sort of early emerging imitative responses that you have during face-to-face interactions might be a very important target for
Yes.
children, especially who are preverbal.
Absolutely, and that has such huge implications for clinical programming with community-based providers of looking at what curriculum checklist or standardized assessment or program they might be using to guide their programming. What is that foundation? Or if we want them to be verbal vocal, we need to start working on this imitation, but it's spontaneous. Or I see a lot of children that are responding, but they're not initiating. It's because the adults are not giving them a chance to initiate because they don't know how to co-construct, and it's always adult directed. So I always find it fascinating to look at these types of responses for children. Is that environment supportive of them spontaneously doing something? Or has it been so adult directed, they don't have a chance to initiate or do anything independently because the adults are so focused on prompting, prompt fading, right? And it's like, just step back and let the child have that opportunity to initiate and advocate. And I think, again, we do that so well in NDVIs, looking at all of the different social pragmatic functions and being responsive and sensitive to that to keep that communication going. The same thing, joint attention. Are you giving opportunities for the child to point or initiate or look or orient? And I think if caregivers and providers knew how really important that was, and my hope would be that they would hold space and put that into a program, that that really needs to be a pillar or a focus for that. That'll be exciting when that comes out.
Yeah, no, we're very excited. Again, and this was an international project because it
Mhm.
involved colleagues across different countries who are ultimately willing to share their data in the best interest of the end users of our research, which is children and family. Another piece of work that I think is relevant here is a research article we published with Sally Rogers and Patrick Dwyer, who is in Australia, and Susan Rivera, who's in California, where we um, basically articulated the concept of autism as, or early learning in autism, as an atypical balance between assimilation and accommodation processes, which provides a developmental foundation for our action. Basically, the idea that children on the autism spectrum, they have a spontaneous inclination to assimilate new exemplars of knowledge that they already have. If they're very much into something, let's say flags, for example, or jumping up and down,
Mhm.
they easily extend that knowledge to any jumpable environment or to any flags of the world. This idea that you have a specific um, area, which might be a sensory motor process or a more explicit area of interest, and then you expand that, as opposed to accommodation, which is when you will encounter situations where your current knowledge doesn't, it's not a good fit, where you need to do something that requires adjusting. So
Mm.
a new action, a new set of things that you have to do or say. For example, if you see someone who is playing an instrument you're not familiar with, or seeing for the first time. And in those situations, what we know from developmental research is when you're trying, as the child, when you are intentionally trying to feel that discrepancy, when you're trying to do something that is a little outside of your comfort zone or your zone of your current knowledge, basically,
Yep.
and is by, and you, of course, as an adult, you scaffold that effort. You make sure that the child does not experience frustration that then will discourage taking part of that effort. But ultimately, you allow the child to explore the discrepancy between what
Mhm.
they currently have in their repertoire and things that they might be curious about, interested in, um, but they're not currently part of their repertoire, of their knowledge. And that's the accommodation part. And this is where we need to provide or experiences that are basically connected to what the child is familiar with. You don't want to throw the child outside of their comfort zone. We
Mhm.
want experiences that are soothing, familiar, but we also want to challenge them. And here's
Yeah.
the challenge. The challenge is we're doing something that is not completely novel, but it is novel. It's a variation on a template that you might already be familiar with, but it's going to cause you a little bit of extra effort. That extra effort cannot be my prompt.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
When you learn something new, you learn it through your own spontaneous engagement. And so our effort is really to provide that engagement.
That's interesting. And if I can, when I post this, I would love to post a link to your ResearchGate if people want to reach out to you and get that article. I know I will be because I don't think I have that one. It's a 2022. I'm looking at it over here, and I don't think I have that one. That is really fascinating to me as I think about, proximal zone of development and think about how to expand interest. So that's already something that I'm going to read as soon as we're done chatting and I get access to it. Any other research articles that you think would be helpful for people that are wanting to learn about NDBIs or expand on that or the work that you're doing? There are so many. You are all over YouTube, which is amazing. People can come find your webinars and seminars that you've done. Anything else that would be a great resource for people to learn more about your work? We could link
Um,
the website for the university.
Well, we've been publishing a few studies now on the experience of delivering early start Denver model and naturalistic developmental behavioral approaches in general in
Mhm.
the context of early childhood education. And this is about training school teachers in early childhood education settings. We've been doing this in different parts of the world, in Israel, in Australia, here in the US. Um,
That GESTM, so group in
yeah,
those settings. Okay.
so this is a group-based implementation um, program, basically a classroom-based program where you train, instead of training a clinician working one-to-one with a child, you train early childhood educators,
Mhm.
teachers. And the question is, can they implement the early start Denver model at Fidelity? The answer is yes, they can with appropriate training, with appropriate resources. And once they figure out that this is making their life easier, actually not more difficult in facilitating, learning for their children. And we also found that when you implement ESDM, the group-based format of the ESDM, in a regular mainstream classroom that has a few children on the autism spectrum, but mostly typical children, this results in a higher quality of education for all children involved, not just those on the autism spectrum. This is helpful for everybody involved.
That's so fascinating and just observational learning, having our children be in those settings to learn from what's going on around them is so, so critical for their exposure. And I think it's great for providers to spend time in classrooms and to think about like, this is what children should be learning. This particular behavior for a 2-year-old is not appropriate developmentally, but yet you sometimes see it in ABA type programs. And I think it's because there's not a focus on the developmental, there's not knowledge about it. But I think it's great to think about that inclusive setting with the GESDM. And like you said, it can make it easier. And I know there's some research out there about how you're aligning it to standards for early childhood inclusive settings. So that is, to me, policy change, initiatives, funding. I feel like that line of research really opens a lot of doors to get ESDM in not just community-based settings, but school-based settings. And I know you did a lot of work in Australia. Are there any sites here in the US that you have GESDM or research in the US going on?
So there's quite a few
Mm,
programs using the GSDM, some in California, also here in Philadelphia. We
Okay.
we have a project that we're hoping to get funded. We will learn about it soon. That
Fingers
focuses
crossed.
on that. Yes, exactly. But the knowledge is out there. So this is a lot of this is about the initiatives of programs, schools, early childhood education setting. And this is why the work that you're doing is so important to disseminate knowledge so that a lot of there are a lot of people who will use that knowledge if they had easier access to it and navigating all the complexity of all of these acronyms and concepts that we're using. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm really confident that what we saw is that once people start using um, these kind of strategies, then it becomes difficult for them
And
to
not,
even
yeah.
think about not using it. Yes.
Yes, I agree. When you do it this way, I don't remember doing it any other way, and I can't fathom doing it a different way because it just makes sense and it's so easy and efficient and effective to have that in there. Any advice for anybody who would want to think about, I'll link your book that you have and a bunch of the research articles for GESDM, but any advice for anybody who wants to maybe put GESDM or try to get it in their early childhood center? Any any tips or tricks of go to the administrator? Like, how do you get that started? Is it with research or
Well, that's what I used to think. My approach used to be, oh, look, we have this study. It shows an evidence base for this program. Therefore, we should use it. But I'm more and more, um, I mean, this is necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
what's really important is to think about the climate within your early childhood education setting. Is there a leadership that is supportive of using a program or some strategies that will help children on the autism spectrum? And if that's not the case, why? What are the barriers?
Yes.
Um, it might be a matter of perception. For example, the perception that is too difficult,
Too
which
much
is
work, too much yep.
or the perception that is clinical and not educational, and that is also a false dichotomy, or
Mhm.
the perception that um, the role of the school is to implement a curriculum, and then the child goes to therapy after school, and that is where you do treatment. Again, this is another false dichotomy, or the idea that there will be a behavior technician shadowing the child, which sometimes makes it even worse for the child in terms of
Mhm.
the ability to be engaged with the activity.
Yeah.
So figuring out those barriers, because people are
Mm.
reasonable, you can talk through all of these barriers and identify, um, what is the best way to use the resources and the strength that already exist in
Yeah.
that setting, and add the piece of naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention.
Mhm.
But it doesn't. We did it in contexts where there were a lot of resources, and we also did it in under-resourced contexts. It's not just a matter of dollars.
I was just gonna ask if that would be something that would be a way to get access to care for children with autism in environments and countries where they don't have insurance, they don't have a lot of funding, so that it's still it being GESDM, ESDM, classroom PRT, whatever, it's embedded within the school system. So would that make it less stigmatizing for some cultures who don't want therapy? They don't want people coming into their house. It's not culturally acceptable. But in those cultures, the educational teachers are the experts. So to have that kind of support, I'm always curious about implementing these types of approaches in different countries where there aren't funding and dollars and resources.
Yeah.
If that's a
Uh,
good way to segue in.
Yeah, I was recently in the Federated States of Micronesia, really far from where we are in terms of culture, but also in many European countries. And
Uh-huh.
countries that do have resources that just organize differently. And so when
Mhm.
you read the manual of ESDM or another program, it doesn't, you don't necessarily see the fit right away. I
Yep.
think the point is, if you in most countries in the world, you will not find, for example, a workforce of ABA therapists.
Mm.
They don't exist. But in every country in the world, you will find preschools and daycares. They're everywhere.
Yes.
Teachers are everywhere. And what they do is more or less the same. They educate young
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
They
I
have a
look for
mission,
outcomes. Yeah.
yes, and they are very respected members of their communities. So again, what we need to avoid is the perception that you need um, uh, a specific sort of logistical infrastructure to use the content of ESDM or other NDBIs.
Yeah.
You work with the context that exists, and then you think about the principles. Are these principles
Yep.
aligned with the mission of this
Exactly.
school, of this community, of this context? And most of the time, we find that the fit is good for NDBIs.
Yep.
There are cultures that are more discipline oriented and others that are more sort of acknowledging that play and learning go together. So there are variations there, and you need to be aware of that. But we also see that the idea of following the child's lead, facilitating learning through social engagement, that is definitely um, very common across many different cultures.
Mhm. Yeah, these are great talking points. I'm going to link some of the resources that you've talked about and some of the article names because I think this is a great jumping off point for people to think about how to move forward and think about, excuse me, inclusive childhood education and GESTM and just everything that you're doing, which is so amazing. So if that's okay with you, I'm going to link those resources for individuals so they can learn more about your work.
Absolutely.
I thank you so much for being here with us today. They're going to love this talk. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Jamie. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Absolutely.